Hey there, this is Alex. Welcome to Quick Connect, and today we're going to carry on with our conversation on quality conversations. Today we're going to talk about stating assumptions, whereas previously we talked about clarifying assumptions. Today we're going to talk about how stating the assumptions that you have, or even addressing the assumptions that you think people might have, could be useful in the conversation that you have with people. So maybe Ethan, I'll start first. One of the things that I thought was very useful when we communicate with people is to say what you're not saying. Because when we say certain things, oftentimes people have an assumption based on what you say. So for example, if I say that, oh, I have a different idea from you to solve this problem. The assumption that someone might then say is, oh, are you saying that my idea won't work? Or are you saying my idea is stupid? But they will never say it, right? So one of the things that I find useful in conversations is go up to them and say, hey, look, I have a different idea from you. I'm not saying your idea is stupid or your idea won't work. I'm saying this. I found that many times by saying what you're not saying up front actually solves a lot of problems, and it actually clarifies or negates some negative assumptions that people have. And that's really one tip that I tend to use in my conversations. How about you?
So I love what you just said. I find it interesting because at the same time, I would argue otherwise that a person goes, oh, you're trying to tell me that I'm not stupid and my idea is actually usable or possible. Therefore, it's not possible. Therefore, you're telling me it's not that you think that way, right? Okay, so there are people who don't think like that. No, but because you said it that way and the way you said it, I think that's more important, right?
Right.
You created a feeling for the person to feel like, okay, you're definitely not trying to attack me.
Right.
That is exactly what I recognize it as. And I think one of the funniest part about this is I realized as you're introducing us is that if we want to state assumptions, we should state the assumption of what quality conversations are.
Right, we never defined what quality conversations were in the previous video.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. So stating assumptions, right? It is not no argument or not about having fancy talk about like quality conversations are not about having intense discussions or anything else. Quality conversations is where there is common understanding. I think that's what we're really aiming for right now. Quality conversations is really for us to feel at the end of it that we both understood each other and we both gained something from it. I think that's what quality conversations are all about. And that creates intimacy, that creates friendship, that creates a lot of things, that creates what becomes a long-term relationship. So I just wanted to say that as well. But I will agree with you that the not is very powerful, because just now I just created the boundaries of what it wasn't. Right? It is not about not arguing. It is not about having very fancy statements. It's all about having a conversation where we understand and feel rewarded at the end of it.
Right. So when we draw that boundary and we talk about what is and what it isn't, we have both clarity. We have clarity on both ends, and that actually reduces assumptions or clarifies assumptions that people have, and solves some of these problems.
Yes.
Okay. The other tip that I thought was useful was about highlighting assumptions that you're making, especially if the topic is very complex. So economists like to say, right, all things being the same, there's a huge assumption. So when we argue or talk about conversations, it's useful to state what you're assuming up front. To say, oh, I assume that when a person does this, it means that so that people know that you are making certain assumptions and people don't start attacking assumptions that you have. And that actually helps conversations to get along as well, rather than fighting on clarifying some stuff. So some things are hypothetical in nature, and stating that what you're saying is an assumption actually helps the conversation to move along.
So stating that it is an assumption and it's a hypothesis, right?
Yes.
Exactly. So I think that's why it's really interesting. That assumes that you know what your assumptions are.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Yeah, so that's the other assumption behind stating your assumption. So that is that you know what your assumption is, right? So this is where it's really interesting. So the reflection phase before you even talk to somebody and knowing your assumptions then becomes a critical part of quality conversations. Your own self-reflection defines whether you can have a quality conversation or not then.
So what you're saying then is, if we prepare it sounds like there's preparation, right? So if we prepare to understand our own assumptions, where we're coming from and where we're leading the conversation, that helps us to have a proper conversation, or rather quality conversation when it comes to it, instead of what most people do, they just wing it, right? Let's just have a conversation, no preparation.
Yes. And I think that's then that's where it's really important, especially on digital media. Again, that's where we're really talking about. Digital media removes most context. So if I was right next to you, I might read your intention and your assumptions a lot better than if I was to go through the video cam, or if I was to do this over text, right? Because it doesn't create the boundaries of what we're referring to. Because if I'm in the same space as you, if I'm seeing what you're seeing, I already know what the limitations are.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. And then, so I will share a little bit more about typing and speaking in full sentences. So I think this is one thing that is really funny, because okay, so I was learning Korean, and I was starting to realize that in Korean language, they like to shorten everything. It's like our version of pocho, or like buay tahan lah, this kind of person. You know, ayah jalat. You know, everything is shortened to like 2 syllables. Like Korean language functions like this, but because it's within its own language, what happens is that rather than borrowing other languages, so the same word chua, which is like, can we say it as I like you, I like this, I like him, I like that, you like this, or depending on your tonality and how you speak of it. So that is super confusing without context. But because Korean language, the full sentence is super long. In English, so I become long-winded to most people because I like to speak in full sentences, and I like to type in full sentences, but it helps in communication a lot. So if we were to use the example of, I am not trying to tell you, so this is, I'm not trying to tell you that the idea wouldn't work. It's a full sentence. Versus, I'm not telling you that the idea won't work. Okay, that changes the way the person understands. I'm not trying to tell you how the idea won't work, but here's a recognition of the issues at play. Versus, I'm not trying to tell you what not to think, but this got problem. A lot of difference in the way that it's presented. Full sentences and full descriptions of why and how you came about with that conclusion changes the discussion drastically. Because what happens is that the person would assume, like we talked before, that you are assuming a bunch of stuff about the discussion. This is not what I'm trying to do. This is what I'm trying to say, and this is where I'm leading it to, and this is my reason for doing so. Like, so speaking in mechanics, so this is what I like to do. I like to speak in mechanics. So it becomes very useful over chats and a lot of different methods, because when I'm used to speaking in mechanics, I remove the need for context for what I'm speaking to the person about. So by speaking in full sentences, what happens is that I would help the person understand my thought flow. So I'm thinking of this, and therefore it leads to this. So it does confuse some people because they're not used to people saying that, because they're used to assuming how other people talk. But what I do is I force the person to follow my thought patterns,
right,
by speaking in full sentences.
So as you were talking, the thought that came to me was, as we talk about stating assumptions and having quality conversations, the thing is really about removing ambiguity, isn't it?
Yes.
Right. So when we state in full sentences, or when we state what things are not, essentially that's what we're doing. We're removing ambiguity so that things become clear and there's less space to misunderstand what's being said.
Absolutely, and that's what's the reason behind this, and this is where we go to our last bit of this topic, which is called setting intention, right? Intention setting. One of the biggest things here is that the reason why people don't communicate well, is because the word trust, which is very interesting. So one of my favorite things about what I've learned is that being a consistent person will get you eventually to be understood by other people. So they might not understand you on the first day, but if you repeat that action for like the next 20 years, you're super predictable, right? So people who know me long enough know exactly what I'm going to say and what I'm going to think about, how I'm going to process something. If they knew me for longer than 3 months, I'm that predictable. I'm very consistent. So this helps in intention setting. So whenever I speak to people, especially if they're new, I have to repeat to them, okay, my intention of saying this is to address that. My intention of this statement is not to, so the nots are very important in setting intention, but the other thing is about setting the intention of is not to hurt you, is not to show malice, is to try to address whether you can take this feedback or not.
Right. So it's clarifying the intention, right? And oftentimes in NLP, one of the questions we always want to ask is, what's the positive intention behind that behavior? So we separate the intention versus the behavior that someone sees and experience. And oftentimes, when we see someone behaving in a certain way, we assume their intentions depending on the level of trust.
Yes.
So if we don't trust the person, we assume their intentions are evil or bad.
We assume the worst.
Yes, we assume the worst. We do trust the person, then we assume that the person is for us, and therefore we can be safe. So stating your intentions does help to build trust and helps people to feel safe. And at least people don't second guess what your intentions are when you say something or have a certain behavior.
Yeah, I recently had a conflict with the co-working space owner recently, and it was a very silent conflict. So what happened was that there was a bunch of behaviors that I failed to do that was pro-community in some sense, but it was due to absent-mindedness on my part. So there was a bit of struggle on his side. Then he just sat down and went, okay, how does Ethan think? Okay, this is probably the reason why. So because that's a good thing about intention setting on a regular level. When you set it and you set it all the time and people know your intention, it is easier for you to go back into, okay, what's this person's general intention? And this is why in stating assumptions, it's so critical to state your intention and your process of assumptions.
Yeah. So I'm going to rewind a little bit to our previous video when we talk about clarifying assumptions. Yeah. I think it's actually very useful for us to clarify intentions, which we didn't talk about the last round. So it's good if we can state our intentions to people, but a lot of times we have to also recognize that sometimes we make assumptions about people's intentions.
Yes.
And if we clarify intentions of other people, it actually helps the conversation and the trust to be built much easier.
Yes. However, okay, so I will go back to Malcolm Gladwell's book. I like his books too as a reference point. One of the key statements that he always made was that people never think they're doing anything bad. So their intention is always positive in their head. So nobody ever thinks, even the serial killers ever think that what they do is bad. If you ask Hitler, he thinks he's saving the world.
Right.
So that's a very important thing. So if you recognize that the positive intent has nothing to do with the underlying traumas or the thought patterns that the person has that is already limiting their scope, but recognize that this is the best they can do with their thought patterns.
Right.
Then you can start clarifying the intention. Can I understand if you're trying? Okay, I understand you have good intentions behind this. Can I understand what you're trying to do?
And actually, the next thing that we talk about can go on to a section of its own, whereby you talk about the person's intention, but the person also have their own beliefs, their own map of the world, and it's that map of the world that allows them to translate those intentions into certain behaviors.
Yes.
So by understanding intentions, we can actually help them to enrich their model of the world.
Yep.
Right? Through clarifying assumptions. They might have certain assumptions, like Hitler might assume that, I don't know, Jews were evil or whatever it was. So he had an assumption. If we could clarify assumptions and change assumptions, that effectively could change the behavior of that person as well. So then that would be very useful.
Yep. And I think just if just as a last bit, in as much as you might be skeptical of a person's vocalized intention, recognize that is the truth for the person at that moment. And that's very important in having quality conversations. So benefit of the doubt in giving the best belief in that person. Because again, when we talk about that worldview that the person has, that might be what you're reading. Right. But the person fully believes in what he says as his intention.
Right. So giving the person the benefit of doubt. Is that about validation as well? Is validating the person's experience?
Absolutely. And that's related back to the book you're reading. Yes.
Yeah. So thanks guys. That's pretty much for today. We talked about basically stating assumptions, to talk about what you're not saying as well as what you're saying, highlight the assumptions that you're making, Ethan talked about speaking in full sentences and also about stating your intentions when you're talking to people. And we segued a little bit about how we should then realize we have certain assumptions of our own and about people's intentions and start clarifying those intentions with people. And that will actually help us to have better quality conversations with people.
Yep.
So thanks very much for joining us today. And we're going to see you at our next video.